Hey guys, welcome back to IOHK TV. I'm delighted to have Charles Hoskinson here, the founder of IOHK. How are you doing today?
It's great to be here. Malta's a beautiful place.
How are you enjoying the Malta Blockchain Summit so far?
There's too many people. I think they have room for 1,000, and there's 3,000 or 4,000 here.
Yeah. I actually think it's like double that.
Yeah, it might be.
You're not the first person that said that to us. But can you just tell us a little bit more about your background in IOHK?
So I'm an entrepreneur in the space. I've been in the cryptocurrency space for about 7 years. IOHK is my third company. It's kind of the passion company. That's the one you start after you make your money. Yeah. And we have about 160 people. We operate in 16 countries, and we're both a research and a development firm. So we specialize in the science of cryptocurrencies, and we build blockchains and cryptocurrencies for clients or internally.
You're working on Cardano, I think.
Yeah, we've done Cardano. We built a client for Ethereum Classic. We work with Horizon. We have a lot of Pan-African focus in our enterprise blockchain line for like supply chain management, property registration, business registration, and we have a few unannounced projects that are pretty cool.
Oh yeah?
Yeah.
Tell us more about those.
Oh no, they're unannounced.
Fair enough. So what do you personally want to achieve with Cardano? Why is it different to what's out there?
So Cardano is just a natural iteration of where the space is at. So Bitcoin was kind of the first generation of technology, and that was all about just proving out this notion of digital scarcity and actually achieving market value with tokens. I mean, there's no reason Bitcoin should be worth any money or people should pay for it, but it achieved that. And then once that set into the space, then we said, well, it's kind of blind, deaf, and dumb. We can't do anything with Bitcoin outside of moving it around to people. So let's add programmability, and that's what Ethereum was all about. And that's been a wildly successful experiment. So now the third generation is about scalability, interoperability, and sustainability. So scalability, how do you go from thousands of users to millions of users? Interoperability, we have over 1,000 different blockchains and lots of legacy solutions, and they can't talk to each other right now, so we need to figure that out. And sustainability is all about the who pays and who decides component of the system. So who pays for development of the system, and how do you actually resolve disputes without resulting in Bitcoin Cash or Ethereum Classic? And that's what Cardano tries to solve, is innovate in all three of those areas.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say is the most effective use case of Cardano?
So it's basically, as you go from generation to generation, you can do all the things the prior generation can do. So we are a smart contract system. We are a platform for dApps. We're also a platform for issuance of assets and currencies. So it's just like all those nice investment banking things that people do with Ethereum, you can do in our system. But the goal is to do these things at scale. And also, we'd like to blur the lines between permission technology, permissionless ledgers, and basically say, okay, how about you do this? If you have a supply chain system and you're onboarding millions of coffee farmers in Ethiopia, how about we give them a path so that they can connect to a blockchain for lending or for remittances or insurance? And that's what we try to do with Cardano, is to make it easy to go from a permission ledger to a permissionless ledger. Another example would be exchanges. Right now they kind of live in hell, where when you send your Bitcoin or your Ether to an exchange, that's a live hot address on a public network. Yeah. Now you've already lost your privacy, you've already lost control of the private keys. You probably as a consumer would much rather that be in a more secure system. And so if you had a permission ledger, they could reverse transactions or lock the ledger, so if they get hacked, they can get your money back. So if you had a way of moving between permission and permissionless ledgers seamlessly, then we could have much more security and much more certainty behind the business logic, like full reserve exchanges or these types of things. So that's one of the goals of the Cardano project, is to say, hey, let's continue pushing the science and the engineering forward so we can scale to a large level and we can be interoperable with a lot of different chains and we're sustainable, but then let's also bring those permission ledgers like Fabric and other things into the fray and allow them to seamlessly work with our systems.
And is there a number of projects that are being worked on the Cardano platform?
So we haven't launched smart contracts yet. That's probably a Q1 to Q2 thing of 2019. But we have a lot of people that actually want to launch on our system. We've talked to hundreds of different people. So I think we're going to be pretty competitive in 2019. But it's a scientific project as much as it is a research, as much as an engineering project. We've written over 40 academic papers, and a lot of them have gone through peer review. Our consensus protocol alone is the product of 6 academic papers, and they've gone to major conferences like Crypto and Eurocrypt and CCS. So we're a little slower than some of our competitors, but we do things the right way. We use formal methods and we use peer review, and this means that there's much more certainty that when all the protocols come together that they're going to work properly and we won't have a DAO style event or a parity hack or these types of things.
Cool. So just back to Malta again, obviously they've just passed a few bills recently, for the regulatory framework into regulating blockchain cryptocurrency in Malta. What's your personal philosophy on regulation and blockchain?
It can be both a positive and a negative thing. It just depends on how it's applied. Regulation is generally a response to bad behavior of incumbents in your industry. There's very few industries that encounter regulation when everything is working very well. It's when things fail. And if you look at ICO mania in particular, there was a paper called Coin-Operated Capitalism that came out of University of Pennsylvania School of Law that asserted that 70% of ICOs that were conducted during 2017 were in some way fraudulent, where what they claimed they were offering was different than the code or the conduct of the founders. And so when you have a situation where 7 out of 10 of your ICOs have some sort of legal problem or regulatory problem with them, that's a real big invitation for regulators to take the space more seriously. So there's going to be all kinds of regulation on the custodianship, on the insurance, on the banking side, on the asset side, that's going to add a lot of clarity, and it's going to add a lot of checks and balances and controls to kind of tamper down, for the sake of consumer protection and geopolitical reasons, the ICO mania that we've been having. Moving beyond that, though, it is interesting to see where you can evolve regulation, particularly on compliance and on business law. So on the compliance side, AML KYC is very old. It's a 20th century model, and it makes an assumption about how money flows and how people flow, and it doesn't really account for things like the internet, and it doesn't really account for global business. So it's really expensive to have a proper compliance regime, and it gets harder and harder in every year to make sure that that regime is working properly. So as a consequence, that needs a lot of renovation and innovation, and there's a lot of potential in our space to add things like zero-knowledge cryptography and other things to allow people to own their data and turn KYC to more of a transactional thing than a God mode thing where the MSP has to know everything. And the other side of it is kind of next generation regulation, where, for example, we have things like DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and there's open questions of, can these things own assets? Like if you have a DAO, can it own intellectual property? Can it own tokens? Does it have legal rights? Well, right now, no, but changes in regulation could actually give a DAO legal rights, and if that happens, you could actually have a decentralized business. So you talk about a corporation that doesn't actually live anywhere, but its rights are recognized, and it can go to court and sue people and so forth. So these types of regulations will come in the next few years, and they're pretty exciting.
So what do you think that larger jurisdictions like the US can learn from smaller jurisdictions like Malta in terms of the regulation?
So what the United States does, and the European Union and other larger jurisdictions, is they tend to look to smaller jurisdictions as laboratories. And they say, okay, well, you guys go run the experiment, and if it blows up in your face, your value at risk is in the millions to billions. But if it blows up in the US's face, we've ran that experiment with like MBSs and these things, and we had the 2008 financial crisis, and it was a worldwide depression. So it can be in the tens of trillions of dollars. So what they do is they say, you run the experiment, and if we get enough data that there's good outcomes, then generally the United States will change its laws or its policies. A great example would be the Jobs Act, where Europe allowed crowdfunding for equities, and U.S. watched that, and they said, wow, that's actually a pretty good idea. And then they passed in 2013 a legislation that allows you to sell securities to retail investors through a more distributed way. So I think the innovation of Malta, Switzerland, Liechtenstein, and other jurisdictions is a great way to convince U.S. regulators that they need to change policy. And there's a lot of things we need to do. I mean, this whole state versus federal government on MSB regulation, where you have to have over 40 licenses to be a MSB in the United States and do business with people, is insane. And this whole concept of having two sets of securities laws, one for the state you reside in and one for the federal government, and those blue sky laws, it's crazy. So there needs to be a lot of innovation there, and I think that'll come over the next 10 or 15 years.
And do you think the overexuberance of the ICO mania 2017, the start of 2018, has negatively affected the space? Do you think it may have lasting damage, or do you think we're going to recover from that slowly?
Well, I mean, it has the same impact that any collapse has. For example, with the dot-com boom and bust, it didn't mean that the internet's a scam, and it didn't mean that Amazon and Google and Facebook and all of these things have no value and are useless companies. What it effectively did, though, was it said, hey, if you're going to invest, and hey, if you're going to build things here, you can't divorce yourself from reality and basic business principles. If you have no product and you have no strategy for acquiring customers or producing value, you shouldn't be worth anything. And in the dot-com boom, there was a lot of ventures that suffered from that mistaken notion. And it's the same situation with ICO mania. There were a lot of people who got funding who really had no product, no way of getting customers, and produced no value. And those will get washed out. But the strong people will survive, and they'll go on to become the Amazons and the Facebooks and the Googles of the future.
I'd love to ask you, what do you think the most important application of blockchain technology for the betterment of society would be?
So I think it's more philosophical than technological. So the philosophical component of it is, if you look at the structure of the world tends to live with a lot of collective fictions. There's religions and money and governments. These things don't actually exist. There's not like Zeus up on the mountain, and the money in your pocket isn't actually connected to anything. It's just fiat, and the corporation you establish doesn't actually live anywhere. It's just an abstraction. So when you create these abstractions, it allows people to coordinate on large scales. You go from the tribe to trusting people all across the world. I can do business with people in Malta because I know there's rule of law, and I know that if we sign a contract, there's a collection of systems that will protect me in the event that a problem occurs. Well, the problem with all of these fictions is that they tend to be very hierarchical, and they tend to be set in stone or difficult to change for everyday people. And what cryptocurrencies did is it woke everybody up and said, well, if you don't like your money, you can create your own money. All my contractors in Ukraine are paid in Bitcoin. They don't like the local currency. And I couldn't do that 5 years ago or 10 years ago, but now it's the thing they want to do. So it allows people now to be the architects of their own fictions, and they can completely reinvent the corporation, completely reinvent money, completely reinvent society, and including voting systems and consent and privacy and these types of things. So I think that is probably going to be the longest, biggest impact of the space, is to give a toolbox to every human being to build global scale systems that, if they get it right, can go viral and eventually spread to millions to billions of people and be self-sufficient and imprint their own money, their own resources. I mean, you create a blockchain, it creates money like Dash, for example. You could be paid from the treasury system, and your employer could be your own product. That was just not possible to do. And so that's a really cool concept, and it's a global concept, something all 7 billion people contend with.
So you mentioned that you've paid your developers in Bitcoin. Like, do you think that fiat currency could eventually be replaced by digital currency, or do you think they'll always be working in parallel?
I think there's just going to be competing currencies. We're going to move away from this concept of wealth in terms of how many dollars or euros I have, and I think we're going to move into the concept of the universal wallet, where you have portfolios instead. So you maybe have some tokens representing gold, and some tokens representing silver, and some tokens representing real estate, but then you can do even more exotic things, like you can tokenize your labor as units and make them fungible, and then pre-sell them to raise extra capital. That's kind of like your new payday loan. Then you could also have airline miles and all these other things, and it all lives in a portfolio, and payment systems will be smart, and market making will be decentralized. So when you go to Starbucks to buy something, you could be paying them in gold or airline miles. They get paid in dollars or euros. So when you live in that kind of world, does it really matter what your sovereign currency is? Because you can have a portfolio composed of anything. So, and cryptos could be part of that portfolio, or that you could have a completely sovereign currency and keep all your money in dollars. That's a personal choice you make. So we go from being spoon-fed an economic reality to being completely in control of our economic reality, regardless of where we happen to be born, whether we won the geographic lottery or not.
Absolutely. So, obviously, we're well aware. You're the co-founder, one of the co-founders of Ethereum. Do you believe that they will overcome their scaling difficulties? Like, do you think Casper and Plasma could be effective?
Well, they're working real hard on it. Casper's gone through a lot of iterations, and it's gone through a lot of debates and changes, and they seem to be converging to a design that they're comfortable with. And the underlying primitives of that design don't look too bad. The problem with us is that they haven't really written Casper down in a way that's understandable to cryptographers and verifiable to cryptographers. It's really easy to say things about scalability, but it's a lot harder to prove things about these things. So I have no doubt that they're going to deploy a protocol, and I have no doubt that they'll be able to go through a lot of peer review and testing, and the community is quite large, and there's a lot of engineers and scientists floating around the Ethereum space, so whatever they end up deploying is probably going to be pretty good. But 2019 is going to have a lot of competition. There's Algorand and Thunder Token and Ouroboros and Rapid Chain and tons of things like this that are very good for scaling and sharding. And at the end of the day, the market's going to have a hard time deciding which one's going to be the winner. So they got to get something out soon if they want to differentiate themselves. If not, they'll just be one of many solutions in the pack.
So obviously Malta's proclaiming itself as the blockchain island. Would you ever consider moving your business over to Malta?
Well, actually, we're leaving Hong Kong. We're moving to Wyoming in Colorado. So I mean, in the United States. It's right next to Colorado. I live in Colorado, and so we're now a U.S. company. But we do run a lot of subsidiaries abroad, and if we do anything that involves MSB, we'd probably do it in Malta if we wanted an EU connection. It's a very good hub for that. We do have some substance in Switzerland as well, and I helped set up Crypto Valley, so that's kind of near and dear to my heart. But Malta's a great jurisdiction, and what's nice about it is that it kind of has one foot in each lake. the legitimate business lake and the kind of gray area business lake, like gambling and these types of things. So what's nice about that is cryptocurrencies also have one foot in both lakes. So it's a natural fit, I think, for our industry, and there's a lot of great entrepreneurs that are moving here. I believe Binance is coming, and other people are coming to Malta. So that will probably have a big influence over regulation. The Prime Minister is quite bullish. The banks are bullish. And when you look for a vetting jurisdiction, it's not just do the taxes and regulations line up. For example, in Isle of Man, you can make that work. It's also, can I actually get good professional services, so good law firms and lawyers and good accountants and these types of things, and can I get audited? Also, can I get bank accounts that are actually meaningful, and is it easy to get to and out of the country for when I want to do administrative things? Malta is pretty good in all those cases compared to Isle of Man or Gibraltar or these other jurisdictions, or the Caribbean jurisdictions. So I think they're quite competitive in the class of blockchain islands.
Absolutely. So do you have any updates or any news that you're working on at the moment you can share with our viewers?
Well, Cardano 1.4 is coming out soon. We just did the dev cutoff for that, so look for that. It's coming soon within the next 4 to 6 weeks. Ledger support for Cardano is coming as well. Trezor support was just announced at the end of October, so that was pretty cool. And we're getting ready for Shelley, and that's decentralization. So Ouroboros is marching its way to production, and boy, it's going to be a lot of fun. So look for all those updates as well.
Absolutely. All right, well, thank you for your time today, Charles.
Thank you so much.
Pleasure speaking with you. That's EAK TV. Hit the subscribe button below. Enjoy the event. Enjoy the rest of the event.
Cheers.
Yeah, cheers, brother.